A few days ago, we overheard a debate about the wonders of the world. To our surprise, we discovered that not everyone can even list all 7. Try this experiment. Pause the video and see if you can name them all. Based on our estimates, most people will only remember 3 or 4. That's why we decided to create a short video to help everyone not only know the names, but also get a brief overview of the history behind each wonder. After all, most of them have been destroyed, and in some cases, there's even doubt about whether they truly existed. So make yourself comfortable. Over the next few minutes, we'll introduce you to the fascinating history of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Let's start with the origin of the very concept of wonders. It's clear that since ancient times, whenever our distant ancestors built a megastructure, they would immediately call it a wonder. However, the formal creation of lists of wonders as a recognized practice began with the ancient Greeks. And it wasn't limited just to architectural achievements. In Greek philosophy and rhetoric, compiling such lists was an entire literary genre. They would list the greatest orators, kings, generals, and so on. The wonders of the world became an offshoot of this tradition. It is believed that one of the first people to classify wonders was Herodotus. In the 5th century BC, he named 3 wonders of the world, although none of them made it into the later classical list. The number 7 was adopted by the Greeks around the 3rd century BC, and it wasn't random. 7 was the sacred number of the god Apollo. It was considered perfect and symbolized the completeness of any list. Arguably, one of the earliest versions of the list is considered to be a poem by Antipater, either from Thessalonica or Sidon. It was in this poem that the 7 wonders were first mentioned, and the list closely resembled the classical one. It included the walls of Babylon, its hanging gardens, the pyramids, the Colossus of Helios, the Mausoleum of Mausolus, the Temple of Artemis, and Mount Olympus. Based on this poem, Greek orators began to add to and modify the list. At various times, it featured the Library of Alexandria, the Altar of Zeus, the Palace of Cyrus, Solomon's Temple, the Tower of Babel, and even Noah's Ark. It is believed that the list took its final shape around the time of Alexander the Great, who himself built many grand structures and established an empire that ushered in the Hellenistic era. In the centuries that followed, historians repeatedly tried to revise the list, adding the Colosseum or the Great Wall of China. In 2007, there was even a global vote to select new wonders of the world. However, as you likely know, nothing has managed to overshadow the original 7 from the Hellenistic era in terms of popularity. That's why we'll be focusing on them. And we'll begin with the Lighthouse of Alexandria. Contrary to popular belief, the lighthouse was not built by Alexander the Great. The Lighthouse of Alexandria was a product of the Hellenistic era, completed during the reign of Ptolemy II in Alexandria around 279 BC. It is the only one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world that had a practical and highly important function. As you might guess, the Lighthouse of Alexandria served as a beacon, continuing the vision of Alexander the Great, who founded the city to become the main trade hub of its time. The lighthouse was an impressive structure and held the title of the tallest man-made building on the planet for a long time. Standing at a height of 120 to 150 meters, it greatly assisted sailors thanks to a massive fire at its top, which could be seen from up to 50 kilometers away. Day and night, mules carried wood to the top to keep the fire burning throughout the night. The significance of the Lighthouse of Alexandria is hard to overstate, especially since it was reportedly used to calculate the Earth's radius for the first time, or so modern scholars believe. The lighthouse also served as a fortress. For example, in his writings, Julius Caesar clearly described how he was able to defeat the army of Ptolemy XIII only after taking control of the lighthouse and the cape. The Lighthouse of Alexandria stood for over 1,000 years and ranks among the top 3 most enduring wonders of the ancient world. It might have survived to the present day, but with the rise of the Arab world, both Alexandria and the Cape fell into decline. The lighthouse, which had withstood several powerful earthquakes, was no longer maintained. The only real modification was replacing a Greek statue toppled during the 956 earthquake, with an Islamic dome. In 1303, an earthquake damaged the lighthouse even more severely, almost completely destroying it. The final remnants of the lighthouse were used in 1480 by the Sultan of Egypt, Kate Bey, to build a fortress. Today, the underwater ruins of part of ancient Alexandria are being considered for development into an underwater museum, as many fragments of the majestic lighthouse have been discovered there. So, there is no doubt about the existence of the lighthouse. Just as there is no doubt about the existence of the Colossus of Rhodes, one of the most debated wonders on the list. It too is partly a legacy of Alexander the Great, since one of his successors, Demetrius, attempted to storm Rhodes, laying siege to it for a full year. He failed, and around 290 BC, the joyful citizens of the city decided to celebrate their victory by building a statue. The Rhodes School of Sculpture was widely renowned. And what happened next, you probably already know. A giant statue over 30 meters tall was constructed over 12 years. However, for the most part, the Colossus was made of clay. Though its core was iron for stability, the statue was covered with bronze plates. The Colossus shone magnificently, but about 50 years later, an earthquake struck that the structure couldn't withstand. Nevertheless, the collapsed statue lay on the ground for nearly 1,000 years, until 653, when Arab forces captured Rhodes and dismantled the statue to sell its remains. The next wonder is the Mausoleum of Mausolus. In fact, the very word mausoleum originates from the name Mausolus, because the structure built for his burial was truly awe-inspiring. Erected for the Persian ruler by Greek sculptors, this architectural marvel reached a height of 45 meters. Interestingly, Mausolus died 2 years before construction even began. The project was initiated by his loving wife, but she too passed away before it was completed. In the end, the couple's urns containing their ashes were placed in the unfinished mausoleum, but the construction continued. By that time, the craftsmen believed they were no longer just honoring a ruler, but creating a powerful architectural wonder. And so it happened. The mausoleum stood for over 1,000 years before being destroyed by a series of earthquakes in the 15th century. This time, the remains were dismantled by the Knights of the Order of the Hospitallers, who used the stones to build the castle of St. Peter. That castle was later seized by the Ottomans and renamed Bodrum. The castle still stands in the city of the same name, and even today, you can find fragments of the mausoleum made of polished marble inside. And now, our next guest, the Temple of Artemis. It's legendary, if only because it underwent several reincarnations. The first version dates back to the Bronze Age and served as a site of worship. The Greeks believed it had been built by the Amazons. That version was destroyed by a flood, and in 550 BC, the epic construction of the famous temple began. It lasted 200 years and was completed around 380 BC. Remember the poem by the poet we mentioned earlier? He said that, compared to the Temple of Artemis, even the pyramids seemed pitiful. The temple's roof was supported by 127 columns, and according to legend, each one was a gift from a ruler somewhere in the world. It was as long as a football field, slightly narrower in width, and about 20 meters tall. It's one of the few wonders of the ancient world that was specifically designed with earthquake protection in mind. Ironically, earthquakes weren't what destroyed it. The first to do so was Herostratus, who set the wonder on fire just to become famous. There's a legend that on that very same day, Alexander the Great was born. The Greeks joked that Artemis was too busy attending his birth to protect her temple. As an adult, Alexander initiated the reconstruction of the temple, making it even larger and more magnificent. The third version of the temple was practically a mini-city, complete with its own administration, warehouse, and finances. But Christians didn't quite appreciate its grandeur. When the area came under the control of the late Roman Empire in the early to mid-5th century, the temple was shut down completely. References to it were erased as blasphemous, and as was tradition, its materials were scavenged and reused elsewhere. It's believed that parts of the Hagia Sophia were built using columns from the Temple of Artemis, and that statues and other treasures were taken to Constantinople. Today, all that remains at the site of the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus is a single lonely column. But the next wonder of the world was even less fortunate: the statue of Zeus at Olympia. As you might guess, it was connected to the Olympic Games. In the 5th century BC, the Greeks decided to honor the god in whose name the games were held, and began collecting funds to build a temple. By around 456 BC, the temple was completed and became the largest in the world at that time: 22 meters high, 27 meters wide, and 64 meters long. But the real highlight wasn't the temple itself, but the statue of Zeus that was built inside it. The task was taken on by Phidias, who used 200 kilograms of gold and precious ivory to craft the body of the god. The statue is believed to have been incredibly detailed, lavish, and awe-inspiring. It was unveiled in 435 BC. Just 200 years later, an earthquake caused significant damage to the wonder. However, it's believed that the statue was restored and may have still been intact by the early 5th century AD, even though by that time the temple had been mostly plundered by Christians and thieves. There are two versions of how it was ultimately destroyed. One claims that the statue was transported to Constantinople, where it burned in the Palace of Colossus in 475 AD. The other, simpler version says the statue burned down along with the temple in a fire in 426 AD. But that's harder to believe, since by then there was little left of the temple. Let's move on and take a look at the two most popular wonders that almost everyone knows. First, let's talk about the Hanging Gardens. In fact, their very existence is highly questionable, since unlike the other wonders, excavations have not yielded any solid evidence. Most of the mentions come from Greek and Roman authors, who loved to exaggerate and were writing long after the gardens were supposedly destroyed. Even the origins of the gardens are unclear. Most sources attribute them to the legendary Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, who allegedly built them in the 6th century BC for his wife. But there's another version that credits the Assyrian queen Semiramis as the builder. In fact, her name appears so often in descriptions of the gardens that it became synonymous with them. This wonder is especially mysterious. Poets describe the gardens as a multi-level cascade of grapevines, trees, and shrubs that transformed an ordinary palace into a green mountain. And supposedly, they were destroyed by the warlike Persians in the 1st century BC. But again, there is no conclusive evidence that they ever existed. So maybe it's better to go to Egypt and see the only wonder that has survived to this day: the legendary pyramids of Giza. The largest of them, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, still amazes visitors. It was built between the 26th and 23rd centuries BC. Although its marble casing has been stripped away over the centuries, the original grandeur is still visible. We won't go into too much detail about the pyramids here, since their history is more or less well known. But now you also know the story of the other wonders, those that even after thousands of years of edits and new lists still remain unmatched. See you next time.